Hi everyone, this is Paul. So the Grenadier has been on sale for around 2 years, but there's not a lot of local content available on it from an South African user's perspective. Quite a lot of content from international users. So I thought I'll just make a short video highlighting my experiences with the Grenadier. So I'll just go through its design, its chassis and suspension, the powertrain, exterior features, interior features, things that I've liked, things that I don't like, and then also issues I've had, as well as sort of cost of ownership and a view of how it compares with some of its local competitors. I've owned the vehicle for around a year, done over 10,000 kilometers, mixed use, off-road, on-road, towing, etc. So I think it's given me, I think, a fair experience of what the car is about, and hopefully you find it useful. So when you take a closer look at this vehicle, it's clear that durability, off-roadability and practicality was prioritized in its design, and a lot of things about it make sense if you think about it from that perspective. When it comes to durability, a lot of the things that you won't see in a showroom actually determines the durability of a vehicle like this. There are quite a few videos online where it's put on a vehicle lift and you can take a bit of a closer look at the chassis and the components and the quality of the welding, etc. I'll put some links in the description and that I found useful. I think suffice to say that a lot of the components used are almost over-engineered in the sense that it's meant for a car that would be much bigger or heavier than this. I suppose the sort of standout feature, if you want to call it that, of the chassis is that they went with a solid front axle. So only, I think, Suzuki Jimny, Land Cruiser 70 series and a Jeep Wrangler still available with solid front axle. In short, some of the drawbacks is that it's not going to be quite as comfortable on road. Whatever happens on one side of the vehicle will impact the other side because those are linked with a solid axle, and also unsprung mass. A solid front axle would be heavier than a independent suspension in general, so that mass isn't dampened by the suspension, so it will cause the car to roll around a bit more than what would otherwise be the case. However, what you sort of lose out on road comfort-wise is you do make up on the off-road side. So you tend to get better wheel articulation, so you'll keep more of the wheels on the ground more often, which is obviously good for off-road traction. And then obviously durability of a front axle. There's a reason that every big truck out there meant to carry tons of load for a working life of a million and a half kilometers as a solid front axle. Just by inherent design, they're typically stronger and more durable than an independent suspension setup. Often when you see all-wheel drive vehicles going up a steep rocky incline, people snap CV joints and shafts. Not as likely to happen on a solid axle, so that's the positives. So obviously if you're a small manufacturer like Ineos, you can't develop your own engine for a product where you're only building 30,000 vehicles a year. It would just be too expensive. So they chose to go with BMW as their engine supplier. So you've got two options: the B58, which is a single turbo 3-litre straight 6 petrol engine, and then the B57, which is the twin turbo 3-litre straight 6 diesel engine. Both of those were introduced around 2016. They've been available in BMW products like the X5, X7, etc. since that time. So there's quite a bit of history and a track record in terms of how the engines have performed and how they stood up under use. So generally they're considered to be quite reliable. Particularly the B58 is prized by engine tuners for its ability to make a lot of power reliably. So both share the same engine block. It's a closed deck design, which basically means no oil and coolant passages around the top of the cylinder bore. So it's been designed from the ground up to be turbocharged and handle high pressures inside the engine. So generally I think a good choice. In this application, both of those engines have been detuned. So in the BMW equivalent model, you would get around 235, 240 kilowatts. Here it's been detuned to around 183. Torque is also a little bit less, 650 versus 550 here. but it is available at like lower RPM, so maximum torque from 1250 to 3000 RPM, so it always feels responsive. There's no turbo lag to speak of, none that I can detect, so I'm very happy with the choice of engine. Okay, and then the gearbox, both are 8-speed ZF automatics. However, the diesel one gets a slightly uprated gearbox, so that's designed to handle 750 newton meters of torque. The petrol gearbox 500 newton meters. So if you go for the diesel, you also get a slightly stronger gearbox. Okay, so let's talk fuel consumption. Fully loaded, 5 people with their luggage on the highway, around 11.5 to 12 liters per 100 kilometers. I think for me that's a tick, more than acceptable for a car of this weight and type. What I don't like though is the standard fuel tank. I think it's a little bit small. It's only 90 liters, so that gives you around a 700 to 750 kilometer cruising range on the highway. Obviously less if you're towing anything. There is quite a bit of space still void between the muffler and the bottom of the boot, this rear muffler, and then obviously there's no AdBlue tank there, so that's another 20 odd liters of space that you could have utilized for fuel. I think it would have been nice if this came standard with around 120 to 130 liter tank to give you around 1,000 kilometer range on the highway. Obviously you can solve that aftermarket by fitting an auxiliary fuel tank. There is a 77 liter auxiliary tank available in South Africa for the diesel versions, so that gives you 167 liters, which I think is plenty for touring around Southern Africa, even if you're towing a trailer or a caravan. So that would solve that problem, but would have been nice if the standard tank was around 30 to 40 liters bigger. So when it comes to the interior, we're going to start here at the driver's side and work our way around. So I would describe the materials used as functional, durable, high quality, but definitely not luxurious. So a little bit of a soft touch material here on the dash and the top here of the door, but everything else is fairly hard plastic, but everything is well screwed together. I haven't had any issues with rattles developing or creaks or any of that type of issues. Everything is well put together, but just the gaps on some of the trim material, you definitely won't find that in a Audi or Mercedes or BMW. But yeah, the materials are more meant to be, I think, hard wearing and durable, as opposed to particularly luxurious or plush, but everything is well put together. Just in terms of visibility, so visibility out the front and to the sides are actually really good. This upright A-pillar does help a bit, and then the square door of bonnet makes it quite easy to see exactly how far you are from anything in front of you. Visibility towards the rear is a totally different issue though. So if you look in the rear view mirror, that thick middle door pillar as well as the spare wheel obscures quite a bit of your vision towards the rear, and then the side mirrors are not particularly great. For me they're okay, but they're actually quite narrow. It would have been nice if they were a little bit wider and to give you slightly wider field of view. So visibility front and to the sides I think is totally fine. A little bit of an issue towards the rear. Then probably the design element I like the most is this little wide sill on the window for your arm. You don't actually realize how comfortable it is to put your arm on the window like this until you actually drive a vehicle without this. So no wonder people roll down their windows to put their arm out like this. In here you can easily keep your arm in the car with the window up and still drive like this. I think it's a very nice design touch. Then in terms of the steering wheel, you get a nice leather covered steering wheel, basic volume and radio controls on the right there, and a basic cruise control on the left. It doesn't have autonomous cruise control or intelligent cruise control, just a normal basic one. And then the ignition key is here on the left of the steering wheel, which is a bit of an unusual spot. I think they placed it there because the key for the original Defender goes in the same position. What I don't like though is that there's no illumination down here, so it's a bit overcast or dark. It's actually a little bit difficult to get the key in the right position. It would have been nice if there was just like illuminating ring around the key there. And then a nice other design element I like is just the outlay of the switches and the overhead console here, with the physical switches and buttons. So this car doesn't have the additional high amp switches to the roof and to the rear. It just has the normal 2 to the interior and 1 under the bonnet, but it gives you additional 3 circuits that are pre-wired, pre-switched, and you can wire up accessories to them. I don't intend to put a roof rack on the car, so I'm actually okay with not having power to the roof or to the rear for a rear mounted winch. Then these are just the controls for the differential locks. I found them actually to work quite well, so some people have commented that it's not actually that easy to see whether it's on or off, but once you get used to them and how the lights work, it's actually fairly easy. I found them to switch in and out quite quickly, haven't had any issues. And then the switches for the off-road and waiting mode, and then the other driver assistance features. So it's just the stability control and the downhill assist control, as well as the exterior lights. So those are for the additional driving lights in the front. So in this spec, you don't need to be in off-road mode or low range or anything like that to use those additional driving lights. They're not spotlights, however, so they don't throw a long beam. It's more wider beam for when you're actually off-road and you want a bit of light, so they work in conjunction with the high beams if you switch them on. And then obviously just the interior lights and for the door. And then just continuing down here, so this is, I think, sort of the previous generation of the BMW infotainment screen. It works totally fine. It's quite quick to react. So this little portion on the right is not touch sensitive. It always sort of displays the same information: speed, engine RPM, water temperature, fuel level, gear, and whether you're in high and low range, odometer, and then your trip computer, which you can cycle through using the little trip button here. You can decide what you want to show on that little menu. What I did find a little bit irritating is that you can only cycle sort of one way through it, so it doesn't really matter whether you press this button up or down. It sort of cycles through that one way. It would have been nice if that went either sort of forwards or backwards. So you have to cycle through the whole thing to get to the setting you just skipped. And then just in terms of the infotainment screen here, I think it's more than big enough. So it's got a home screen, and then what's cool in this car is you get this off-road menu. So when you press it initially, it takes a few seconds to react and load, but once it's loaded, it's actually fairly responsive. So the first menu there gives you your basic vehicle attitude, so your pitch and roll angle, altitude. It's also quite nice, it actually gives you your steering wheel angle, so you can see which way your front wheels are pointing. Then the next menu shows you your temperatures. So it gives you your oil temperature, your gearbox oil temperature, as well as your transfer case oil temperature, the pressure in each of your tires, as well as the temperature of that tire. It obviously also comes with a low and high tire pressure warning. To reset your tire pressures, you just go into the options there and you can set your recommended cold pressure. What I have found lacking though is that once your tires are heated up, it doesn't want to reset that temperature. You can only set it when the tire temperatures are below a certain value. I'm exactly not sure which or what that value is. So sometimes that is a bit annoying if your tires are warm and you arrive at the spot where you need to deflate them, and then you get the warning that your tire pressure is too low. But once you reset them, it will obviously remember the pressure they are in and give you a warning if the pressure goes above, or that temperature gets too hot, or it falls below that saved pressure. Then the next menu is this Pathfinder menu. So you can actually record and load a GPX track on that. So I recorded one a little bit earlier today, and you can just save it, and you can either follow the path you just loaded, record a new one, and it's also got a road book, so that just keeps a tab of your trip, and you can obviously reset your kilometers, etc. So go back into the options here. I can just stop this trip, and then the next menu gives you your statistics. So it just gives you your trip statistics. It gives you a little bit of an elevation profile, average fuel consumption, distance traveled, and then obviously your current latitude and longitude as per the vehicle's GPS. And you can obviously automatically reset that at the start of each day, or manually reset those if you want. And then the last one is the electrical one. So it gives you your current vehicle battery state of charge, voltage in the battery temperature, and it gives you an indication whether the battery is currently charging or discharging, and at what rate it is doing so. And then just in terms of the smartphone integration, this does have wireless Apple CarPlay. I think Android Auto is still wired, but yeah, it connects seamlessly. It works very well with Apple phone. I haven't had any issues, so yeah, as you would expect, no issues there. And then down here you have a little compass, so that's a functional compass. It gives you your elevation as well as your compass bearing. It's quite a nice touch. Not all vehicles come with that. And then the center console with the main climate controls and some of the other vehicle functions. I do like that they've got nice big physical buttons for everything, and they are nice to operate, nice tactile feel to them. They feel well damped, quite solidly built, really nice to operate. And I think overall this is quite a unique and innovative, fresh type of design, given all modern vehicles typically come with quite a lot of screens and swiping and clicking and pressing places on the screen of your finger. It's nice to have these physical buttons. Then just here, the transfer lever and the gear stick. So for me, the transfer lever, it would have been nice if this little ball on the top here was made of something like aluminium or something a little bit more substantial feeling than this plastic. Obviously not that there's anything like functionally wrong with it, but it would have just I think felt a little better if that was sort of a nicer surface to touch. This shifter is out of a BMW, as you can see. It works pretty well. Some people commented that it doesn't always complement the rest of the design of the vehicle. It doesn't really bother me. I think it fits in quite nicely, does what you need to do with it. You can obviously override it, put it in manual mode, and the nice thing is that it actually does hang on to whatever gear you select. And then down here, normal BMW sort of iDrive controller. I think also sort of a previous generation of iDrive, but I think one of the better infotainment systems out there in any case. It worked quite well, easy to operate without taking your eyes off the road. And then I also do like that it still has a normal manual handbrake, particularly if you're going off-road. Automatic gearbox, not as crucial, but much better than a electric handbrake, which only has an on and off basically, and you can't modulate the brake pressure. It's nice to have a manual, old school cable operated handbrake if you're off-roading. And then a design feature which quite a few people have commented on is this sort of relatively high footrest here on the driver's side for the right-hand drive vehicles. I think it's just a function of some of the exhaust manifold parts, etc., running this side of the car. So this is a bit higher in right-hand drive vehicles. I haven't had any issues with this, so my feet and legs are quite comfortable after sitting in here for 8 or 10 hours. So I'm sort of average build, 5'10", 5'11"-ish, and I haven't had any issues, but some people have commented that it feels a bit funny having that footrest as high up as it is. For me, not a problem at all. And then just in terms of storage space in the cabin, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So the door bins or pockets are quite nice and big. You can easily fit a nice big water bottle in there. The glove box though is actually fairly small, not much space for anything but maybe a small wallet and some sunglasses. You do get 2 cup holders here in the front, but nothing in the rear. We'll get to the rear just now. In the middle, the center storage console is also not particularly deep or big. Nice thing though is that it does come with a proper lock. It's an optional extra, which this car has, which is nice to have somewhere a little bit more secure to store stuff. I would probably have just sort of constructed this center box, or the inside at least, of metal if you're going to go through the trouble to put a more sturdy lock on it instead of the normal plastic. I think it's better than a lockable glove box, but they could have maybe made it even a little bit more secure for people who want to put their travel documents or some cash or whatever in there. Then just in terms of the seats, I found them to be very comfortable, even though they offer limited adjustment. So all of the seats are manual, front, back, up, down, and the backrest angle. So not much in terms of adjustment range, but I've spent sort of 8-10 hours at a time driving the car, and they are supportive where they need to be, very comfortable. So really happy with the seats. These are actually seat covers that I fitted a company called Escape Gear, which is a local company that makes seat covers for off-road vehicles. So these are obviously specifically for the Grenadier. I opted for the cloth seat since I was going to sort of cover the seats in any case with seat covers. So the seat material, the cloth, is similar to this material here on the door. It's actually quite nice, cool in summer, warm in winter. It looks like it will be quite hard wearing if you don't want to cover your seats, but I much prefer the cloth to leather seats in general, given how quickly leather seats can become scuffed and look quite worn actually quite quickly. Okay, moving to the back seat, and what you will immediately notice is that the back seats are actually quite a bit higher than the front ones, which is nice. It gives you a bit more of a better view out the vehicle if you're sitting here in the back. In terms of knee room, I think most people have more than enough space for their knees. There's also plenty of headroom, but I'm not particularly tall, but I probably still have another 20 centimeters odd above my head. Also here on the doors at the rear, you've got the little place to put your arm if you're sitting next to the door. It's also quite a nice touch to have it here at the rear. I think what is lacking though here at the rear is some cup holders for the rear passengers. I think it would have been easy enough to sort something out here above the ventilation here at the rear. You do get 2 USB ports here at the rear, a USB A and USB C. Here in the center console is another 2, also USB A and a USB C, you can also have an optional inverter in the car, which will give you a AC outlet over there. A little bit unusual in this car is that all 3 seats in the rear are sort of identically shaped. So even if you're sitting here in the middle, the seat itself is as comfortable as the 2 on the outside. Obviously the only issue that you might have is here with the transmission tunnel here for your feet, so you'll have to put 1 foot on either side, but the car is quite wide, so I've had 3 adults here at the back, and it's actually quite comfortable, or fairly comfortable. You can probably drive quite a distance with 3 people here in the back without them getting too uncomfortable. Yeah, enough space for your feet, and the vehicle is quite nice and wide, so you can easily fit 3 normal adults here in the back row. Then just in terms of the boot, it's also quite a practical space. So there's no 7-seat option in this car, so there's no seats that fall into the floor or that you need to fold out of the way. So obviously the upside of that is that the boot is nice and big. The downside is that you can't fit an extra 2 people here in the back. So this little shelf is from Front Runner. It's made for the Grenadier, so it sort of fills up the boot from side to side, fits in nicely. And underneath it's meant to take 4 of the Front Runner's storage boxes / ammo crates, so you can fit 4 of them here at the bottom, and still have a little bit of room here at the front to put some smaller items. You can also easily fit 2 sort of medium-sized suitcases under the shelf. And then I've got the optional luggage divider here, so you can load it up to the roof, and you really do have a lot of space. I've also mounted a little fridge here. This roof is actually high enough that you can open this lid without needing to put the fridge on a fridge slide. You can still get in and out and get what you need out of here. So yeah, very happy with the boot practicality. Another nice touch is this little table. So this is also sort of a factory extra that you can get. I found it particularly handy, particularly if you're actually loading the car and you don't want to put stuff down on the ground in the dust or dirt. You can load stuff from here in and out while you're packing, and obviously also use it to make some coffee, drinks, snacks, etc. It actually works quite well, and it clicks in quite securely, so it doesn't rattle or make any noise. So happy that I have added that to the car. And then another nice optional extra is this little storage container inside the rear wheel, so it is lockable. I wouldn't keep the crown jewels in there, so it's not like super secure. But it's nice for things like your recovery kit, which is what I've got in there. Things that once it's dirty, you don't really want it in the car. So there's enough space in there to keep things like a couple of recovery ropes, jumper cables, shackles. I also put the wheel spanner in there, so it's nice to have that little storage area outside the car. And then just in terms of the tow hitch, so I do like that you can actually unbolt it completely if you want to, so that will even improve your departure angle a little bit more. I also like that it has a couple of points for attaching a normal tow ball with bolt here, so I removed that just because I can't fit bicycles. Well, the bicycle rack doesn't fit under the spare wheel if you fit it directly to the tow ball there, but it also comes with a tow hitch receiver, so you can extend it a bit further backwards if you've got something like a bike rack that needs to fit under the spare wheel. So I like that you've got a couple of options in terms of tow balls and types of stuff that you can fit, and here, as well as a little gap there to put your trailer brake cable, etc. You can tie it to that little point there, that gap. Now, the rougher the road, the more at home this car feels, and heading up this cattle track in Lesotho, everything just comes together to make the car feel quite at home and even relatively comfortable on a rough track like this. So the steering, the suspension setup, everything just pulls together to instill a lot of confidence if you do come across a track to go and explore it, even if you're not exactly sure what might be around the corner. So when it comes to on-road driving, it is a bit of a mixed bag. So first, I think the good points. So relative to what you might expect for a vehicle of this type with a body on frame chassis and solid axles front and rear, it actually performs quite well at higher speeds on a highway or motorway. You don't need to do too many steering inputs, and it actually feels quite planted and stable at speed. Also, the cabin is actually quite well insulated, and relative to its shape, it actually doesn't have too much wind noise. It's very easy to hold a conversation with your passengers. However, around town, it is let down a bit by its steering. So the steering is quite slowly geared. It means you have to turn the steering wheel quite a bit to get the front wheels to change direction. So it can feel a bit ponderous, and then it's also quite slow to self-center, which means you have to sort of counter steer once you're around a sharp bend or corner. So that can catch you out if you're used to a car with rack and pinion steering. It does take your brain a couple of turns and kilometers to get used to it. Once you're used to it, it actually doesn't bother you that much, but it's always something that you are aware of. You can do a few things to remedy that a little bit. You can play around with the caster angle, and then there's also some adjustments you can make on the front ball joints to adjust the maximum steering angle that can be applied. So I found that to make a bit of a difference, but the turning circle is still quite wide, and with that rear view camera that's relatively slow, it does make it a little bit more bothersome to reverse into parkings, etc., than might need to have been the case. Um, However, if you're going to use the car mostly for longer distances, off-road driving, touring, it's probably going to be less of a factor in your life. So I think it just depends on where you use it. I've seen a lot of the tests of this vehicle in more developed markets where it's mostly tested on road, and you actually only appreciate its potential when you take it onto a really challenging, rough off-road course, sort of where it's designed to shine, and there it really does perform quite well and instill a lot of confidence in whatever obstacle might be tackling whatever obstacle might be in front of you. So we're just going to take a walk around the outside to show you some things and features that I like and don't like. So first of all, if you just look at the recovery hooks, so these are proper recovery points, two front and rear, and they are super sturdy. They're much thicker than any of the recovery shackles that you would be attaching to them. That's not always available in other cars in the segment, or you'll have to fit them as an aftermarket accessory, but yeah, they built in and they're easily accessible, two at the front and rear, so that's a really nice feature. And then secondly, this car comes standard with steel bumpers front and rear. That's a popular aftermarket accessory for cars that don't come with them, that people take off-road. So here you get a steel bumper from the factory. There is mounting points for bull bars, etc. So it just makes it easier to fit stuff to the bumper. You can also get it from the factory with a built-in winch, which is also not something that's readily available from some of its competitors. There is now a new sort of winch mounting section that you can get. So this middle section of the bumper you can actually remove. It's modular, and then you can actually fit a winch of your choice if you don't like the factory option. So just in terms of trim and options on the outside, it's quite nice that you get a proper set of all-terrain tires with this car. So these are BF Goodrich KO2s. So often, all-wheel drive or seemingly outdoor adventure-focused cars ship with highway terrain tires. So I understand why manufacturers would do that. You'll get better fuel economy readings, emission test outputs, etc., whatever. But what's the point if most owners will just need to, put a proper hard-wearing set of tires on as soon as they get the vehicle. I also quite like it that you have 17 rims on this car, 17-inch rims. So I think most other vehicles in this class will either come with 18, 19, or even larger size rims, which means you can have a nice, big rubber sidewall on your tire, etc. So less chance of you damaging your rims if you go off-roading. And I also like that you can get steel wheels. You can get alloys, but I do think they sort of complement the overall look and feel of the vehicle. And then one thing that's quite cool is you can get this vehicle from the factory with a proper set of rock sliders. I don't know of any other vehicle that you can get from the factory with rock sliders. Yes, side steps and running boards, but go try taking those off-road and parking those on a rock. They're not going to look the same as when you started your adventure. So these are meant to be, to take the full weight of the vehicle. You can put a high lift jack under any point and lift them up. The only negative for me here is that they probably missed an opportunity to sort of flatten the top part here and maybe extend it to the top a little bit. So you can also use it as a step. So at the moment it's a little bit too close to the body, so you can't use it as a sort of a step to get into the car. But they are robust and bolt directly to the chassis. And then just the interesting sort of design features, the differentials. So you'll see they don't look like the ones you typically see on a pickup truck or bucky or whatever. So the axles come out, sort of at the lower end of the differential, and then it's also flattened off here at the bottom, and then the drainage plug is off here to the side, so you're not going to easily hit that, when going off-road. So you can see they put some thought into the design of this car to make it very capable off-road. And then just in terms of a raised air intake or snorkel, so this vehicle isn't fitted with one, but there's a hole behind this panel, as well as pre-drilled holes here and here to fit that. So it's very easy to fit one afterwards, should you wish to do that. I think another positive for me is how easy it is to add accessories and customize this vehicle. So if you lift the rear seat here, you can see that it comes fitted with a dual battery system that you can get from the factory. I've upgraded it a little bit by fitting a lithium battery, but all the wiring, all the fusing is there for you to easily expand it or upgrade it if you want. But you can get a dual battery system from the factory, and there's also space here to fit a accessory like an air compressor. It's pre-wired, pre-fused, so you just need to connect it. Makes it nice and simple to add your own stuff, and it's quite easy to do so if you like to do that type of thing. And then little quirk or rough edge, if you want to call it that, is you can see there's a little hole here and on that side for wiper stalks. So these ones are fitted in the position like you would do them for a left-hand drive vehicle. So it means that they leave a bit of a blind spot here in the driver's bottom right mirror. So it's a bit funny that they never fitted the wipers the other way around on the right-hand drive vehicles. And then just in terms of issues with the car, in terms of outside items, so the first one was there was a worldwide recall on these door handles. So what tended to happen was that this little button used to stick in the pressed position, and that meant that when you close the door it would just jump open again. It happened typically when it was wet, and you either had to slam the door quite hard or just like wiggle this button to get it to pop out again. So they replaced all my door handles and the lock set at the first service and gave me 2 brand new keys. So all the door locks were replaced under that recall, and the new ones operate quite a bit smoother. Haven't had any of those issues, so it seems that was sorted. So not a major issue affecting reliability, but glad that was sorted out. And then just another item that was problematic was these rubber door seals. So I think they had an issue with some of the early production runs with the adhesives. So mine did come loose here at the bottom of this right rear door, as well as on the front door a little bit. So that was fixed, so that put them on at the dealership, and then they ordered a new set of door seals for all the doors. I got that a couple of weeks later. Haven't had any issues with the door seal since then, so I think they sorted out also the issue of that initial adhesives keeping the door seals on. What I must say though is that these doors seal really well, haven't had any dust intrusion issues even after driving on dust roads, dirt roads for many hours at a time. Both the side doors, back doors, this car is quite dust proof actually. Okay, just running through the Grenadier and some of its local competitors. So I'll start here with the Toyota offerings. You can have the Land Cruiser 76 series station wagon for around 1.16 million, or Land Cruiser Prado, Land Cruiser 250 starting at around 1.5 million, or Land Cruiser 300 starting at around 1.54 million. So the 76 series, that design is around 40 years old. It's been around since 1984. Currently fitted with the current Toyota Hilux drivetrain, so nothing wrong with that. That drivetrain has been around for 12-13 years, quite reliable, a little bit agricultural, but it probably doesn't bother Land Cruiser 76 buyer too much. I think the only downside here is probably the value for money in terms of what you get. You even need to fit something like a tow bar as an optional extra, and then it also still has leaf springs at the rear, while the Grenadier has coil springs, so the leaf springs can get hung up more easily on obstacles off-road. You really need to be quite nostalgic, I think, to pay that type of money for a car like this, but we'll also quite shortly look at the pricing for second-hand original Defenders and just how that compares, so that might also surprise people in terms of what those are selling for. Land Cruiser 250 or the Land Cruiser Prado, that starts at 1.5 million. It still gets the same Toyota Hilux engine, which at this price point you would probably expect them to offer something a little bit more refined, a little bit more modern. For me, the positives of this vehicle is just the styling. I think it looks great on the outside. Negatives for me is fitted with the Toyota Hilux engine, as well as the rear wheel being fitted underneath the car instead of on the tailgate like the previous model. And then the ground clearance on this is also relatively low compared to its competitors. And then the base model Land Cruiser 300, that's probably the vehicle that's most similar to the Grenadier. I would say the Grenadier is a little bit in between the two, almost a Land Cruiser 70 with suspension on the rear that's been a little bit updated, and the front and the rear tracks aligning, with an engine that's a bit more modern, like you would get in the Land Cruiser 300. But that's probably the, I think, closest competitor in the real world that people in the market for Grenadier would consider. And just quickly going through some of the specifications. So you can see here the approach, departure, and the ground clearance for these vehicles. So just by way of comparison, the approach and departure angles on the Grenadier is 36 degrees front and rear, and the listed ground clearance is 264 millimeters. So doesn't need to stand back in terms of any of those sort of off-road focus metrics on any of these. But then again, you can see that the fuel tank size on the Grenadier is around 20 liters less than on the Land Cruiser 300 and 250, and 40 liters less than what you would get in the 76. And then also in terms of average fuel consumption, all of these would be lower than the Grenadier. I suspect if you add all-terrain tires, which don't come standard on the Land Cruiser 250, and you fit steel bumpers, etc., that difference would close a bit. But I think all of these would probably use around 1.5 to 2.5 liters per 100 more than the Grenadier. They also weigh a little bit less, so you can see here that the gross vehicle mass of the Grenadier is 3.5 tons, so these are all a bit lighter, and then the curb weight of these also around 300 kilos less than the Grenadier. And moving on to the Land Rover Defender, these start at around 1.8 million, so you do pay a bit of a premium for these in terms of drivetrain. The D250 model has almost exactly the same outputs as the Grenadier. Obviously, it's a unibody SUV, fully independent suspension, so it's going to drive a lot more like a car on the road. I think the target customer base is probably the least similar to the Grenadier for these cars. So, and I'll show you just now in terms of what I mean by that. So, difficult to find optional accessories and things that you can do to the car yourself that's not in the Land Rover options list. So here is an example of what I mean by that. Say for instance you want to fit a pair of rock sliders to your Defender, which is quite a common aftermarket accessory. Look at the number of steps that you need to follow to install an aftermarket rock slider. That's not something that you would find on the Defender option list. So you need to cut away quite a bit of the plastic cladding, sound insulation, and then measure, cut some holes into the material, fit the mounts, drill some holes into your very expensive car's bodywork, fit some clips, bolt your rock sliders, and then fit some tape so that they seal properly against the body. And there you have it. Doesn't look particularly OEM, but you can fit it with a bit of trouble. But reading this, it doesn't seem that it ever crossed anyone at Land Rover's mind that someone might want to fit a pair of rock sliders to their Defender. And to make that easy for them, if you go through the same instructions for rock sliders on any ladder frame vehicle, it would be about one page. Usually there's pre-drilled holes. You put the bolts in the hole, tighten them, and off you go. So this to me just illustrates the philosophy behind the new Defender. It's not really a vehicle that invites owners to tinker with it, install their own accessories, make it their own. You order it as you want it to be from the catalog, and that's it. Whereas something like the Grenadier is a lot more easier to work with, and it almost invites you to customize it and make it your own. Grenadiers, so just on the website, there are two demo models listed for around 1.4, so that's relatively good value, I think, compared to something like a Land Cruiser Prado, or even a 76 series, given the if you go for Trailmaster, diff locks, front and rear, all the wiring, tow bar, etc. done, and then obviously the new ones, they start at 1.9, so that would be similar to Defender, or a little bit cheaper than the top of the range Land Cruiser that also has diff locks at the front. The GR Sport, that starts at just over 2 million rand, so similar to that. And then just in terms of resale values, 76 series, all of these vehicles actually hold their value quite well. You can see here that even sort of a very new or lightly used Land Cruiser 76 series sells for more than the list price, so these are still quite sought after and in relative short supply. And you can see that a very common update is to actually change that bumper and fit a steel bumper with a bull bar, etc. So that's a cost that you'll need to factor in, obviously, if you want to do that. Land Cruiser 250, so I'm just starting here at the VXR, so that's the higher of the two derivatives available. Gets the diff lock at the rear fitted, and these start at around 1.55. also relatively new vehicles, so a little bit higher than the list price. So these are still also quite sought after. So likely used one will actually cost you more than list price from the Toyota dealer. You go to the Land Cruiser 300. So these have been around a little bit longer than the 250 and the Prado. The cheapest one I could find starts at 1.4 with quite a few more kilometers, and then sort of also lightly used 1-year-old ones, you're looking at around 1.5 to 1.6 million. Land Rover Defenders, very similar to the Land Cruiser 300, also around the 1.5 to 1.6 million mark for relatively new, lightly used ones. And then finally over to the Grenadier. So the cheapest one I could find is around 1.5. And then if you go to also sort of 1-year-old lightly used ones, not a lot of kilometers, you're also looking around 1.5 to 1.6 million. So all of these in terms of second-hand value sell for similar pricing, and I think all of them actually hold on quite relatively well to their value. It's still only a year or so from the date that these were entering the market, so probably a bit more time to pass before we can make a definitive judgment on that. But early signs are that they do hold on to their value probably just as well as a Land Rover Defender, for example, or something similar. Then just a left field option, if you want to look at an original Defender, there's quite a few of these around. Some of them have done some accessorizing upgrades, but these actually start at 1.4 million as well. So you can also get yourself a original Land Rover Defender with limited kilometers for that year model. I think the last year model was 2016, with around 30,000 kilometers on them for around 1.4 million rand. So if you really want to be nostalgic and have a back to basic experience, you can get into a Land Rover Defender 110 for around 1 million up to 1.4 million, depending on the accessories and the amount of kilometers they have on them. But obviously these are becoming relatively scarce and quite collectible. So that brings us to our last two questions. How do you choose between these vehicles, and is the Grenadier a potential future classic? So I would put the original Defender and the Land Cruiser 76 in the same bucket. Both of those are iconic designs, and you buy them with your heart for people that are happy to live with the compromises of driving a 40-year-old design, so that they can be seen driving a piece of automotive history. If you're going to do most of your driving around town and how the vehicle looks is important for you, I would consider the new Defender or the Land Cruiser 250 Prado as the options there. And if you want to customize your vehicle, kit it out for overlanding, touring, I think the Land Cruiser 300 and the Grenadier are both good options for that use case. Now, it's too soon to say whether the Grenadier will become a future classic, but all iconic designs are quite true to and very focused to their purpose, and often come with a bit of compromise. For the Grenadier to, I think, become iconic, you will need to see a lot of them on the road still 20-30 years from now. It certainly feels like the type of car that you can easily keep for 15 to 20 years and drive it. So time will tell, but I think it's got a lot of the makings of a potential future classic.